Hey guys, this week's video is dedicated to the complete recovery of Masha Bas Bashem. This morning, our friend Dr. Pearl shared with me a thought on this week's Torah portion that I want to expand on a little bit. We live in a world of constant notifications. Our phone is constantly getting bombarded. Phone calls, emails, pings, texts, WhatsApps, constant. And so what do? We start filtering them out. It's a phone number we don't recognize, we ignore it. It's a text, we don't know what that is, we ignore it, we delete it. Right? But what happens sometimes, when we turn off our phone and we're like, that's it, I'm fed up, too much spam, we can miss something very important. We can miss an important message. You start looking at your phone and you're like, oh my gosh, I missed an important phone call. I missed an important email that I was supposed to respond to. Right? This is what happens sometimes. We miss the important stuff because we're being so bombarded. In this week's Torah portion, Parasha Balak, we have the famous story of the Gentile prophet Balaam, who sets out to curse the Jewish nation. And he fails spectacularly. Instead of cursing the Jewish nation, he says 3 blessings instead of curses. But what's interesting is, as he's traveling to, do his plan, his donkey stops suddenly. And he gets annoyed. Why is my donkey stopping? He's riding on his donkey and stops. So he whacks the donkey. And this happens 3 times. And finally, after the 3rd time of beating his donkey, donkey turns to him and miraculously speaks to Balaam and says, why are you hitting me? He says, why do you keep stopping? He says, what do you mean? The donkey says, don't you see the angel of God right in front of us, blocking the path? And suddenly, Balaam opens his eyes, so to say, and he's able to see the angel. And he gets off the donkey and he apologizes. He missed the message. God had been sending him a message through the donkey. And the donkey was trying to intervene. Hey, dude, this plan that you're doing is not a good plan. God is not on board. And Balaam totally missed the message. And even after this message was delivered, Balaam still missed it. He continued on to go curse the Jewish nation. He missed the important message. And it failed spectacularly. Let's not miss the important messages in our life. Let's not miss the messages God sends us. Too often, we take a wrong turn, we bump into somebody, we think it's just coincidence. Nothing is coincidence. God is sending us a message. We're there for a reason. Something is meant to happen. We don't always know what it is. But if we open up our eyes, if we recognize that nothing is by chance, then we're able to be more in tune. When an important message comes in, we open it up. Indulge me for a few minutes as I share with you a story on this. Rabbi Chaim Gutnick is a rabbi in Australia. He lived in Sydney. In his early years, when he was there, he was mostly a businessman. He was a little bit of dealing in rabbinics, but mostly in business. One time he gets a phone call before the high holidays from the Jewish community in Adelaide, Australia. It's a very small Jewish community, and they said they need a rabbi for the high holidays. Would he be willing to come? And he says, look, I don't want to leave my family for the high holidays. I'm sorry. So the community in Adelaide turned to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and wrote a letter and said they asked Rabbi Gutnick, but he turned them down. What should they do? So immediately the Rebbe sent a letter to Rabbi Gutnick, expressing surprise that he would turn down to lead a Jewish community in need. And then the Rebbe wrote on the bottom, P.S., when you are in Adelaide, please look out for the Egyptian Jews that live in Adelaide. Okay. Well, the Rebbe says he's going. So he backs up and goes to Adelaide. He comes the day before Rosh Hashanah and he's sitting in the shul over there in the sanctuary. When suddenly a lady walks in and says, Rabbi, what's the holiest part in the sanctuary? So the Rabbi points to the Holy Ark, the Aron Kodesh. She walks out and comes back in leading a teen up to the Aron Kodesh. And the teen was obviously blind. And this lady takes her to the Aron Kodesh, and this teen breaks down and starts crying, and she's praying there for a few minutes in front of the Aron Kodesh. This lady comes back in, leads her out. Rabbi Gutnick's like, I got to find out more. What just happened? So he went to the synagogue office and says, do you know who those people were? And they said, don't bother with them. They're from the Egyptian Jewish community. They have nothing to do with us. We don't really get along. They're not really involved in our community. You'll probably never see them again. So he remembered what the Rebbe wrote in his letter, and he says, I got to find out more. I got to get in contact with this girl. So on Rosh Hashanah, there was a few Egyptian Jews, and they were sitting in the back, totally separated from everybody else. And he could feel that there was this tension between the community and the Egyptian Jews. So he went over to them and he said, Shana Tova, and he warmed them up a little bit. And he said, look, there was this girl who was blind who was here the other day. Please tell her that the rabbi is looking for her and wants to speak to her. Okay. In the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he gets a phone call. He answers it and says, it's a girl. And she says, hi, my name is Betty. I heard you're looking for me. So he's like, oh, finally, I can speak. But before she has a chance to tell him anything, suddenly click, the phone gets hung up. He's like, obviously something's going on. I need to find out more. So he starts doing some research and he finds out her name, her address, her phone number. He calls the house. Every time the phone is picked up, they hang up on him. They don't let him talk to her. The night before Yom Kippur, he takes a taxi to the house and says, I'm not leaving until I find out what's going on. He knocks on the door. They don't want to let him in. He says, I'm not leaving. So finally they let him in. What's the story? It's an Egyptian Jewish family that moved a year before. And they were still very new to the community. And he starts, talking to them, and they warm up a little bit to him. When the parents are out of the room, he turns to Betty and says, what's going on? Why were you in the synagogue right before Rosh Hashanah crying? She said, Rabbi, here's my story. We moved a year ago from Egypt. As you can see, I'm blind. The only school for the blind here in Australia, here in Adelaide, is a Christian school. And my parents don't have any money. And they couldn't afford the high tuition. And they were very nice, and they gave me a scholarship. And after a few months of being there, they were all very nice to me. Suddenly, the faculty started talking to me a lot about Christianity and all about the religion. And they started putting pressure on my family that maybe I should convert to Christianity. And obviously, my family said no. Well, in this summer, we got a letter from the school saying, look, we have limited scholarships, and we only give them out to Catholic Christian students. If your daughter converts to Christianity, she could get the scholarship. Otherwise, you have to pay full tuition. My parents can't afford full tuition. And they were very torn what to do. They're not religious. They're not very involved with Judaism at all. And they were very torn. We need to, this school provides so much service for me. And what would I do without it? And over time, they started thinking, okay, maybe she's going to have to convert. Maybe just outwardly, and we'd still remain Jews, but maybe this is something we have to do. And I was devastated. The day before Rosh Hashanah, I told my parents I can't go to school, I don't feel good. When they were out of the house, I ran to the neighbors and I begged her to please take me to the synagogue. She took me, and I went up to the Holy Ark and I prayed to God, please send me a sign. Please let me know you have not forgotten. On Rosh Hashanah, we were having a holiday meal when somebody said, Betty, what did you do? The rabbi's looking for you. He wants to talk to you. That's where I knew my sign was answered. God had answered me. Now, my parents, when they heard that, they said, you are not talking to the rabbi, because they were afraid you would convince me not to convert, and then they would be stuck. They thought it was in my best interest. And that's the story, Rabbi. And even though they didn't let me talk to you, I knew you would find a way to help me. Well, when the parents came back in, Rabbi Gutnick said, look, we're going to make sure this is dealt with. There's no way Betty can convert. And they said, what are we supposed to do? We can't afford the tuition. He said, look, the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent me with you in mind, with your daughter in mind. He wrote specifically on the bottom to look out for the Egyptian Jews here. He was talking about Betty. He said, let me borrow your phone. He called up the president of the Jewish community of Adelaide and said, get down here right now. We have something to take care of. It's late at night. The president's like, this is not the time for this, Rabbi. The rabbi said, look, tomorrow night is Yom Kippur. If you don't come here within the next 20 minutes, I am leaving tomorrow morning back to Sydney and you can find another rabbi for Yom Kippur. The president said, I'll be right there. Comes down. The rabbi fills him in what's going on and says, the Jewish community of Adelaide must take the financial responsibility to pay the tuition so that Betty can go to school and not have to deal with any nonsense of conversion. Well, the president begrudgingly agreed, especially since, he didn't want to lose the rabbi the day before Yom Kippur. And it was settled. And Betty went to school. The Jewish community paid the tuition. After she graduated, Rabbi Gutnick helped her go to seminary in Israel, and she married a Jewish person and raised a Jewish family in Israel. When Rabbi Gutnick wrote this story back to the Rebbe, gave him a report, he said, I can see, here she is asking for a sign, and the Rebbe sent me, and the Rebbe answered the sign. And the Rebbe answered, not only was her message answered, but this was a message for you as well. This is a message that you should get more involved in rabbinics. And this was a turning point for Rabbi Gutnick. And he got heavily involved became a full-time rabbi and became one of the biggest rabbis in Australia in the last 60 years. My friends, sometimes I know there's a lot of noise and it's easy to just shut things off, but let's not miss the important messages that God sends us in our life. Shabbat Shalom.